Steve Jobs was born on February 24, 1955 in San Francisco, California. His biological parents were two graduate students, but they chose to give him up for adoption soon after his birth. A kind couple named Clara and Paul Jobs raised him and named him Stephen Paul Jobs. Clara worked as an accountant, and Paul was a Coast Guard veteran and skilled machinist. They lived in Mountain View, California, in a quiet neighborhood that would later become Silicon Valley.
From a young age, Steve was very curious about the world. As a toddler, he was always exploring. Once, he stuck a pin into an electrical outlet and burned his hand. Another time, he accidentally swallowed some poison. His mother, Clara, taught him to read before he even started school. Steve loved to learn new things, especially about how machines and electronics worked. At home, his father Paul built a workbench in the garage and showed Steve how to take things apart and put them back together. This garage became their workshop, with wires, circuits, and parts spread around. Young Steve helped his father fix radios and toys, and this hands-on hobby gave him confidence and mechanical skill. He would play with every gadget in the house and was not afraid to make mistakes.
In school, Steve was very smart, but he often felt bored. He was a prankster in elementary school, joking around because he found the classes too easy. His teachers once tried to skip him ahead in grade, but his parents said no. By his teenage years, Steve wanted to learn about computers. He joined the Explorers Club at Hewlett-Packard High School. There, he saw a real computer for the first time. He even called William Hewlett, the co-founder of HP, asking for parts for a project he was building. His passion for electronics grew stronger when he met Steve Wozniak at that club. Wozniak was a few years older and very good at building circuits. The two Steves became friends and later business partners.
After high school, Steve decided to go to college. He enrolled at Reed College in Oregon, but he did not stay long. He dropped out after 6 months because he did not like the classes he was taking. Steve said he followed his interests instead. He kept going to special classes that he found interesting, like a course in calligraphy that taught him about art and beauty in lettering. In 1974, Steve took a job at Atari, a video game company, where he fixed and designed games. He worked there for a few months, but then he felt the need to travel and learn more about himself. He took a journey to India to explore Eastern spirituality and see the world. There, Steve studied Zen Buddhism and lived simply, sharpening his mind and patience. This trip made him think deeply about life and creativity. After a year, he returned to California with new ideas.
When Steve came back to California, he had big dreams about computers. In 1976, at age 21, Steve and his friend Steve Wozniak started a company called Apple Computer in Steve's parents' garage. This garage in Alto Altos was small and filled with car parts and old machines, but it became the birthplace of something amazing. Steve and Wozniak worked long hours cutting circuit boards and building the first Apple computers. To pay for parts and tools, Steve sold his Volkswagen camper van and Wozniak sold his scientific calculator. They named their first computer the Apple I. It was simple by today's standards, but it was special at the time. They sold it for $666.66 each and earned some money. By 1977, their newer model, the Apple II, became a big hit. Families and small businesses began buying Apple computers because they were easier to use and cheaper than big mainframes. Apple's sales grew quickly. 3 years after the Apple II release, the company's sales were $139 million. Apple grew fast. In 1980, Apple Computer became a public company. On the first day its stock was sold, Apple's value jumped, and the company was worth $1.2 billion. Steve Jobs was proud to see ordinary people buying his computers. Everyone said Apple was a success story. But with success also came challenges. Some of Apple's new products in the early 1980s had design problems and recalls. The computer world was changing fast. IBM and other companies made their own personal computers that ran on a different operating system. Apple had to work hard to keep up.
In 1983, Apple's management changed. Steve wanted the company to grow even more. He convinced a marketing expert named John Sculley, who used to run Pepsi-Cola, to become Apple's new CEO. Steve trusted Sculley and thought he would be a good leader. Soon after, in 1984, Apple released a famous new computer called the Macintosh. The Mac had a graphical screen and a mouse, unlike most computers of that time. Apple advertised the Mac as a creative and cool computer. People liked the idea, but the Macintosh was not compatible with IBM's software, which made some businesses reluctant. Behind the scenes, Steve and John Sculley began to disagree. Sculley thought Steve's ideas were too risky and said Steve was hurting Apple's sales. A struggle happened in Apple's boardroom. In 1985, the executives sided with Sculley. Steve found himself losing power in the company he had co-founded. Even though he started Apple, he had given up the title of CEO so the board could tell him what to do. It became a bad situation. Finally, Steve Jobs decided to leave Apple in 1985. He felt sad and disappointed as he walked out of Apple's offices for the last time.
After leaving Apple, Steve kept thinking about computers. He invested $12 million of his own money to start a new company called NeXT in late 1985. NeXT made new computers that Steve hoped universities and business people would use. The first NeXT computer came out in 1988. It was very powerful, but it was also very expensive, about $6,500. This price was too high for most people. Still, the computer worked well, and its software was very advanced. Even Tim Berners-Lee, the inventor of the World Wide Web, used a NeXT computer to write the first web browser in 1989. In the end, NeXT never sold in huge numbers. In 1996, Apple was in trouble and decided to buy NeXT for $429 million. This deal brought Steve back to Apple, but his story did not end there. In 1986, Steve also bought a small animation company from filmmaker George Lucas. He named this new venture Pixar. At first, Pixar made computer hardware for graphics, but Steve had a vision for movies. He invested $50 million of his own money to keep Pixar alive. Under Steve's leadership, Pixar started making animated films. Their first film was Toy Story in 1995, the very first feature-length movie made with computers. Toy Story and later Pixar movies like Finding Nemo, 2003, and The Incredibles, 2004, became huge hits. These movies made families and children around the world happy. Pixar became one of the most successful animation studios. In 2006, Walt Disney Company bought Pixar, and Steve Jobs became Disney's largest individual shareholder. Through Pixar's success, Steve made a lot of money, even though he was no longer selling computers.
By the mid-1990s, Apple was struggling. The computers were not selling well, and the company was close to bankruptcy. In 1997, Apple acquired NeXT, which meant Steve Jobs was back in the company he started. He returned to Apple first as an advisor, but soon became interim CEO and then official CEO again. Steve found Apple very different. He made big changes quickly. He cut many of the old projects and focused on just a few great products.
He also asked his designers, like Joni Ive, to think simple and elegant. Steve took a very small salary, just $1 per year, because he really wanted to rebuild the company, not earn money. One of the first new products was the iMac, released in 1998. The iMac was a colorful, all-in-one computer that connected to the internet and was very easy to use. Apple advertised it as friendly and creative. People loved the iMac's simple look and bright colors. The iMac began to sell well and brought Apple back to life. With success from the iMac, Apple began to make even more products. In the following years, under Steve's guidance, Apple created music players, phones, and more. Steve Jobs did not stop after the iMac. In the early 2000s, Apple came out with the iPod music player and the iTunes Store, which changed how people bought and listened to music. Then, in 2007, Apple introduced the iPhone. The iPhone was not just a phone. It was also an internet device and a music player with one big touchscreen. On January 9, 2007, at an Apple event, Steve held up the first iPhone and said, "Today, Apple is going to reinvent the phone." The audience was amazed. The iPhone brought the internet, music, and apps into people's pockets. It started a new era of smartphones that are now very common. In 2008, Steve introduced the MacBook Air, the world's thinnest laptop at that time. He stood on stage, smiling, holding the MacBook Air in one hand. The audience saw how light and slim it was, thinner than an envelope. This showed that Apple was not just making phones and music players, but also very sleek laptops. Under Steve's leadership, Apple's stock price and profits climbed. By 2007, Apple changed its name from Apple Computer to Apple Inc. to show it was making many kinds of devices, not just computers. Apple became known for making products that combined technology and art, just the way Steve liked them. In these years, Apple released more new devices. There were new iPhones almost every year, new iPads, tablet computers, new Macs, and MacBooks. Competitors always tried to catch up, but Apple's products had a special style and loyalty. By the 2000s, Apple had become one of the most admired companies. People started to use the word Apple lifestyle to describe fans of Apple's design and gadgets. Through all of this, Steve remained the face of Apple. He gave presentations in his black turtleneck and jeans, showing the next big thing. Behind the scenes, Steve's health was a concern. In 2003, he was diagnosed with a rare form of pancreatic cancer. Steve kept this illness private at first. He delayed surgery and changed his diet, hoping it would help. In 2004, Steve had surgery to remove the cancerous tumor, and it seemed successful. He continued to work and kept innovating. However, the cancer came back in later years. In early 2009, Steve had a liver transplant and took several months off from work. By January 2011, he announced he would be taking another medical leave. On August 24, 2011, Steve told Apple that his health was worse than he thought. He handed over the CEO role to his friend Tim Cook. Steve Jobs resigned as Apple's CEO and became chairman of the board. With a heavy heart, he said goodbye to his daily responsibilities. A few weeks later, on October 5, 2011, Steve Jobs died at home in Palo Alto at age 56. The official cause was respiratory arrest due to his long battle with pancreatic cancer. Apple announced his death to the world, and people everywhere felt sadness. Fans left flowers and notes at Apple stores. Many famous people and colleagues remembered him. Steve's sister Mona Simpson later shared that his last words to his family were, "Oh wow, oh wow, oh wow." Steve Jobs' life story is extraordinary. He started as an adopted child who loved to tinker, built the first personal computers in a garage, faced ups and downs, and then changed the world with his creativity. His story ended in 2011, but the devices and ideas he created live on. Today, millions of people carry smartphones, listen to music on iPods or iPhones, and use sleek Mac computers, all of which carry a bit of Steve's vision. The story of Steve Jobs shows how a simple idea and a lot of hard work can make a lasting impact. He will always be remembered as one of the great innovators of our time.